Welcome to The Story Behind the Story, a behind-the-scenes exploration of the human experience and all aspects of life, love, and leadership. Today, we're going to explore with Vice Admiral Sandy Stosz, U.S. Coast Guard retired, becoming a leader of character others want to follow. In her book, Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, Leading in Unchartered Waters, Sandy draws upon her 40 years of extensive experience and wisdom as a woman directing mostly all-male teams in frontline leadership positions to provide tools that are designed to help leaders, particularly those at the middle level, reach their goals and succeed. I'm your host, Angie Bailey.
Hi, I'm your co-host, Lynette Sprowls.
Hi, I'm your co-host, Dominic Petty.
Well, welcome, Sandy. This is just such a pleasure to have this opportunity to share, again, your wisdom, your leadership lessons, and everything that you've experienced in a really long and wonderful career. I remember all of our opportunities to work together, especially whenever we were doing things with personnel and different issues. And leadership was always something that I think we all really just strived to make sure was paramount, not only within the U.S. Coast Guard, but within DHS at large. And so as I was thinking about this and I was reading your book one time, I remember this saying, it said, character is who you are when no one is looking. And so I was just wondering, what do you think it takes to have moral courage to stand strong and steady?
Oh, well, thank you, Angie, for having me on your wonderful show. I've enjoyed the previous episodes. I know it's a new podcast. I'm honored to be here. I'm glad you asked that question because I have this passion about courage, honesty, integrity, all these good words. What do they really mean? And they're also important to leading with character-centered leadership, however you visualize such a thing. And I take a different take on it. So to me, and this is just a personal expression, honesty is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. So honesty should be what's expected of everybody. At any leader at any level, from a child on up, honesty should be doing the right thing when nobody's looking, not when everybody's looking, because it should be what's expected. But I think that courage is doing the right thing and integrity when everybody's looking. And that means the spotlight is on you, and you have to make then those tough decisions with everybody looking, judging, criticizing many times. Some of the toughest decisions have consequences or wouldn't have gotten up to a senior leader's level. So I think that it's important to look at character perspective of, sure, what do you do when no one's looking? And there should be an expectation that you're honest when no one's looking. But it's harder to do those right things when everybody's looking and judging. So I think that that's lost on us. And so often in society, we do see people failing to make those tough decisions when the spotlight's on. They'll defer them. And I've even got another set of thoughts on decision making and the impediments to it. And I think you've got this paralysis by analysis that people come to a point where they just can't make a decision because they don't have all the information they need. And you probably need to, as a leader, get used to making decisions with about 80%, 85%. And as General Patton said during World War II, a good decision made today is far superior to a perfect decision made 2 weeks from now, when, of course, it's no longer, it's overtaken by events. So that's paralysis by analysis. And then there's the consensus conundrum, where a leader can't make a decision because they don't have, I think, going back to moral courage, the courage to say no to certain cohorts. So they want to see consensus. And I advocate for collaboration, communication, all those powerful C words, but not consensus, because the tough trade-off decisions are never going to have consensus, because there's going to be risk and there's going to be people who might gain and those others who might not gain in a really tough trade-off decision environment. So that's a consensus conundrum. And then there's the being nice syndrome. There's a lot talked about these days about leaders need to be nice. And I'm not really sure I understand what that means, because I'd rather be respected for being fair, firm, and trusted than being nice and having people just steamroll over you. And then the people who have an agenda will roll over a leader who's too nice and doesn't have the moral courage, again, to stand up to do the right thing. And then the people who are working really hard look left and right, they're working hard. And then there's a few people taking advantage of a nice leader who doesn't hold them accountable. So it goes back to this whole honesty and courage and how that plays into character. And it's all a big part of being a leader. So thanks for that great question.
Oh, you're welcome. And, as you were talking, I was thinking about this. Our very first episode, we did one, I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was on intuition, right? And trusting your intuition. And one of the things that the three of us talked about is, I don't know where it really happened, but somewhere along the way, we stopped actually relying on ourselves and believing that we were making the right decisions. And instead we keep looking for all these external factors. So as you're describing it and you're saying that we're looking for consensus, or we're looking to make sure that people like us, or that we're making sure that we know what success is and all these things and measures and metrics and stuff. Somewhere along the way, we've forgotten the fact that sometimes we just have to have the courage, as you said, to stand up and say, I'm making this decision because I believe it is the best decision at this particular time, right? With the amount of information that I have. I remember one time with my team, actually, believe it or not, it was when I was taking them to Gettysburg, and some of them were complaining up a storm. They did not want to go. They didn't see what the value of it was because they were in HR. What did Gettysburg have to do with them? And I remember saying to them, my job is not to make sure that you like me. My job is to make sure that I help you grow. And if that means taking you to Gettysburg is what I believe is going to help you grow as a leader, then we're going to Gettysburg. And we did. We went to Gettysburg, and guess what? They loved it, right? At the end of the day, they loved it. And so I couldn't agree with you more that I just think sometimes we have to really put ourselves out there and say, no, I'm doing the right thing for you. And I can sleep at night because I believe I'm doing the right thing, or at least I'm making the right decision.
Sure. I agree. Trust your gut.
Yes. That was the whole point of our original podcast that we had, was really around trusting your gut. I was also thinking, as you look back over your life and your career, were there certain leaders that maybe stood out as being capable of uniting people in support of a shared purpose?
Certainly. And that's another, you've obviously read my book, Angie. Thank you. I'm pretty big on the way forward for a civil society to avoid being divided is to find ways to unite people. And generally speaking, I'm speaking from the Coast Guard's perspective, is we unite around a shared mission, a shared core values, a purpose greater than ourselves. In the Coast Guard, for instance, we serve the people of the United States. We have 11 noble missions with strong core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty. And we unite our people around these values and missions and purpose, as opposed to dividing over, issues of philosophical belief. And there's so many people out there who seem to not understand that. We are a nation divided, and I do encourage everybody listening to find ways as a leader, whatever level you're at, to unite people around the shared purpose of the company, the shared values, and to find ways to have respectful conversations while you're seeking to understand the other person, not to undermine them. And too often, we're conditioned in our society to just jump right into undermining somebody else's viewpoint and saying, nope, we've got the right answer, yours has got to be wrong. And they undermine and argue instead of trying to patiently and respectfully understand the other side. That's a novel concept, right?
So that's interesting. You should bring that up. And Lynette, I would love for you to kind of expound on this. But one of the things that we're going to do in our Leading Ladies of Gettysburg, seminar that we're going to do, the leadership experience that we're offering, is this whole idea around listening, right? Listening with the viewpoint of understanding versus just simply being prepared to have the next response.
So yeah, I do agree, building these listening skills. And one thing that I'd really be curious of, Sandy, is when you were a young girl getting ready to enter as a cadet and enter into the academy, for one, I would love to know if you had any foresight into the gravity of what the impact of your doing that was going to be. And also kind of thinking around this thought of like listening as well as mentoring. If you could go back and mentor that young version of yourself, what would you say to her?
Thank you very much, Lynette, for that question about going back, because it reminds me that I do have 40 years in uniform. And in the beginning of the podcast, Lynette, when we were talking, you were commending me for having accomplished so much. And I a little bit joked it off, not to be self-effacing or anything, but just, wouldn't you have 40 years doing something? Yes, you've got plenty of time to achieve goals, one meal at a time, one day at a time, 1 year at a time, one assignment at a time. And so I think that's important. Note right there to the listeners and readers who may be younger is that you do need some time to build up your maturity, your accomplishments, to achieve those goals and objectives you've set for yourself. And looking back, when I'm doing these podcasts now as a person who did 40 years in uniform, is retired, it's much more wisdom being applied. So to go back to entering as that young cadet when I was 18 years old, oh my goodness, nobody was asking me to be on a podcast and share my wisdom. They were telling me to button it up, shut up, stand at attention, and speak only when you're asked a question. And then the answers were only yes, sir, no, sir, and no excuse, sir. And then when we had women, it was sir or ma'am. But we weren't given much chance to speak. But what did that do? Yes, sir, no excuse, sir. It made you listen so that you could fully understand what was expected. And instead of just jumping to a question of can you say that again, or what did you mean? Using your trained initiative and your intuition, maybe to go back to that word, on trying to listen and figure out what the more senior person was asking, whether it was an instructor or a cadet who was a cadre, which means they were training you, the older cadets in a college learning environment. So I think that's really important, is for young people to realize that they should be listening to understand and not just jumping to conclusions, trying to think through what they've heard and look at the intent of the person saying it. Sometimes you feel yelled at, you feel put down. How much of that is you choosing or allowing yourself to feel that way, as opposed to thinking, oh, maybe this person's just busy and just barking an order. Maybe it's not a personal attack on me. Maybe this person just barks orders, and that's her way of doing business. So I think that listening requirement that maybe we wouldn't have self-selected when we were young. We want to be participants. We want our opinions to be heard. But to go through some enforced listening, that really helped me to become a better leader and a better listener as I got more senior. So I'll answer that part of the question first. And then I should have written down the second part, but let me see. It's not coming back. What was the second part of the question?
Just if you could go back, because you've mentored so many people in your career. So if you could go back and mentor that young version of yourself, what would you say to her?
So what would I say to myself when I was that 18-year-old coming in and to kind of, braced up, so we say, with yes sir, no excuse, sir? I would say that, looking back on it, it's easy to say now, but I would tell that young person, hey, this too shall pass. Doing the hard work, doing the things that don't seem to make sense, plowing through and persevering anyway. When you come out the other end, you feel strong and empowered. That's the one part of it, what you can do. And you can see that I go within. I don't look at, what can I do to shape somebody else. I just look at what I can control. And that's the overall message. What can I control? Teaching that young cadet, don't worry about trying to change the academy, change the boss you've got, the guy who's yelling at you, the instructor that's not the greatest. What can you do to improve your situation from your space? So one of the things that was really helpful to me was learning how to choose to not be offended, and learning how to choose to not let what some of the people there said affect me. Because I was in the third class with women, and in a corps of cadets of about 1,000, we had 5% women. So there weren't many of us. And in a given group, which we called platoons when you're going through the summertime in my day, I might be the only woman in a 30-person platoon. And so there were some guys who didn't think we belonged there, and they'd make that known. And overall, the system was great. The academy system tried really hard, the leadership, to integrate us women, but some of the fellow cadets were like, "Oh, you're not a real girl if you're here." And so you could feel, if you allowed yourself to, unconfident, your self-esteem is being squashed down. And that's the first reaction that someone like me had. I was a less confident young girl to start with, but I soon kind of like figured out that I could either go around constantly feeling that way, or I could say, wait a minute, I don't need to take that seriously. I can just brush that off. And I would advise my younger self on that. Just make sure that you're taking accountability for the way you choose to feel and not allowing what somebody else says or does to influence how you feel, and to find that inner strength to be confident in who you are, and to try to put a shell around it so it doesn't create too much space in your head and distract you from the business at hand. So you're going to fail if you allow those distractions to enter and get in the way of being a good student, being a good cadet, and understanding what's expected of you.
I think it's a really powerful message with regard to, really choosing not to be offended. Because I have to say, pretty much growing up in an all DOD environment, because I spent most of my career in DOD, and then, with DHS, it was very law enforcement, male oriented as well. And it's fascinating. I often would be asked, like, well, what was it like working with all those men? And the truth is most of the men were fantastic. A lot of times it was the women who were not, and so it's just interesting that, sometimes when we've had these conversations about, women building women up instead of tearing each other down. So I do think, though, that it's a very important principle that or message, at least, that you're passing on here about choosing not to be offended by everything that goes on around you. Although maybe you found it too, but I remember sometimes like people would say to me, "Hey, Ange, don't take it personal." And then they'd launch into something and I'd be like, "That was very personal. I mean, let's just call it what it is. That was quite personal," but it's like, you're not trying to, be a victim over it. You're just calling them out to say, no, it was personal and we can move on from here.
I've been there. I agree with you on in the early days. So for context, and context is so important. It bothers me when I hear people talking about the discrimination they faced or whatever, and they're talking about 40 years ago. So back in 1978, when I entered the Coast Guard. So do the math on how many years ago that was. That's not today. But when I entered the Coast Guard, women often tried to separate themselves. They wouldn't come together to support each other because they didn't want the guys to look over and say, "Oh, what are all those girls doing together? Are they talking about us or what?" So we wanted to kind of be independent and not be cast as we had to huddle together. That was the one thing. Then the second thing was, often, but not always, women would find that they'd be the queen bee mentality, where in order to look good and to feel whatever all the psychological reasons are going on in people's minds, they wanted to look better than the next woman, thinking that that was the competition. So you're one of the very few in a group. If there's two of you in a group of 60 cadets, people are comparing you. So maybe there's some psychological tendency for there to be some thought among women, pull each other down so that you look like you're the best. And I saw that. You know what? I don't see that today. Today, I see young women joining together. The Coast Guard Academy has a women's leadership initiative that's got a nice endowment in it now. And women are supporting other women. So I think that's a wonderful thing that's happened over time, is that not only are men supporting women, but women are supporting women, which I would say my worst discrimination in my career was from other women and from being single. I was single until I was 47. And talk about being discriminated against for your marital status. There was at least one or two times where I almost didn't get a job because I was single and didn't have a spouse. And it was considered part of the job to have a spouse.
Isn't that interesting? Because like in the Army, the saying in the Army always was, if we wanted you to have a spouse, we would have issued you one.
As you get more senior and you have to entertain, then there's this expectation of Mr. and Mrs., Admiral and Miss and Mr. And that's not the case today, but my most recent episode with that, almost not getting a job, was about 10 years ago, and I retired 5 years ago. So when I was an admiral, I still had that happening.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Wow. Dominic, what are your thoughts here?
Wow, it's several. I mean, I'm actually thinking of a Netflix episode where a woman's overseas. She's a diplomat, and she has a no good husband that she's in the process of divorcing, but they have to give the appearance of still being a couple there. So a little reminder there. I had a thought about asking you about like habits and routines, because a lot of times people they reach their excellence not just because of just the raw talent they have, or our motivation, our passion. It's just like they on a daily basis or weekly basis, they have certain habits and routines, particularly when they're not motivated or when they're not feeling like disciplined. And you've had a career of 40 years retired. So you've been at that senior level for quite some time. And I assume there's like mentoring that happened there, like, that you gave, that you received. There's like networking. I'm just curious if you could expand on like maybe habits and routines that you would share with people who are already in leadership positions that could help them maintain as well as continue on and excel in their career in leadership.
That's a great question, Dominic. Habits and routines. So in full disclosure, I would be one of these people that comes up as an S1 type personality, right? Where things are orderly and not so much the big picture, letting all the balloons be floating up on the ceiling and being happy with that. So I would think that us S1 types are going to want more routine, but I would think that I'm not regimented either, because I like to be surprised. I like to have variety, but I also, getting back to what you said, and this is important, I think, to what I see some in our culture today, where people, unfortunately, there's some tendency towards looking for an easier and easier and easier life, which sometimes will mean less and less routine, because doing something hard, you sometimes have to have the discipline, the self-discipline to do it. And so, yeah, I could be 300 pounds tomorrow if I didn't get up every morning and make it a mission, regardless of how I felt, to get out and do my exercise, whether that's my walk or a swim or a yoga or weightlifting. And I do actually probably 2 sets of exercise every day, but just disciplining myself to do things that I definitely don't always want to do, because there's some value in that routine. And then there's the sense of knowing when to say, well, today I'm actually sick, so maybe I better hold back. But I think that pushing yourself beyond what's comfortable and pushing yourself even when you don't feel like it to keep a routine keeps you focused and keeps you from drifting. And I think some of the people we see today have allowed themselves, or their society or their parents have allowed themselves to drift, and therefore they're not focused and they can't find the purpose, they can't find the passion. And they also, if they don't get immediate satisfaction, they fall back and try again. So they're constantly, falling back and trying again without putting the commitment into something and following through and getting up every morning and doing a routine to advance one more step and see where they are. And then maybe if it's not the right thing, maybe try something different. So I think that the self-discipline is what I heard, or what I've come up with based on your question. Another thing I'll throw in there is a continuum of exhaustion that I have in my book, and the different types of exhaustion, because surely when you're doing something hard, when you are disciplining yourself to continue to have a routine, to keep it up, even when you don't feel like it, you can start to become exhausted, tired, drained. And I think there's 4 kinds of exhaustion: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And you're not going to be depleted in every of those 4 areas at once. So instead of just saying, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted, I can't do this thing I've got to do tomorrow, what you can do is maybe self-reflect on, okay, am I physically exhausted, for the reasons that we can figure that out, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually drained, and then maybe work these levers. So if I'm, mentally exhausted, maybe then going for a jog or a run and letting my mind clear is the thing to do. If I'm spiritually depleted, maybe meditating and seeking some self-reflection and just letting all the negative thoughts go out of your mind is the way to go. Just throwing a few things out there. So as I got more senior, I was trying to help people go back to mentoring. So how do you mentor exhausted people when you see that they're working really hard, putting in the overtime, and there's a project due? And sure, we all want to be, bosses who give our people plenty of time to have their work-life balance. But there's a project that has to get done. It's got a 1-week window and you're going to have to push for that week. So how do you help people understand their different levels of exhaustion and still be able to maintain their wellness? So I think that understanding that there are levers you can pull, and that just because you feel emotionally exhausted because you're going through a relationship challenge doesn't mean you have to shut down. You can increase the lever over on the spiritual side, the physical side, mental side, by having a good book, whatever. So I hoped to wrap a few answers into that one question you had, Dominic, with a few thoughts on how people can push through and continue to thrive instead of withering on the vine.
Yeah, I really appreciate the answer. And I like how you break it into 4 different buckets, because, it immediately made me think of like, oh, well, I have 4 different areas I can play in, to find energy or to build the energy back up to carry me over. I like the different places where it could play there. You had also said something earlier, and I just a little curiosity, and maybe you could dig into it, because you said, not sure what that means, like to be nice as a manager.
Great.
and it's come up a few times in this conversation in terms of maybe societal change, how things have shifted, because I guess if there's a desire for leaders to be nice, there's maybe a sentiment or with people like now, like there's an expectation of nice or wanting people to be nice, which is, it's definitely a shift for me. Like I've never had that for any part of like walking around in my life, but I'm curious what you've seen, and maybe what you could offer from people who might be in this mindset, oh, people should be nicer to me or should treat me better, as a way of maybe helping them shift that mindset so they can actually show up in life more effectively.
Sure. Good follow on. So I guess I'll start with an example. When I was superintendent of the Coast Guard Academy, which means president of a small college, I would try to, help cadets to mentor, going back to the mentoring, how to succeed on their first unit. Oftentimes you were going out to a ship, and we oftentimes had young women going off to a ship, or maybe they were still on a ship, one of the only women, because some of our ships didn't have accommodations for women in the berthing area. So you might have a couple of women junior officers who could share a stateroom, but the bigger berthing areas weren't equipped for women yet, retrofitted. So I would tell them, hey, you should go onto your first ship if you want to succeed, with the effort of being respected, not being liked. Because this whole thing about liking somebody on Facebook and friending people, I think it gives young people the idea that being nice and being friendly and being liked and all this is what's important. And in reality, you want there to be a respectful relationship where you respect others for who they are and what they do, and they have a respect, and even, yes, maybe even a deference between different kinds of people. So even to this day, I'm 63, but if I'm meeting up, going into a store with a 90-year-old on a cane, I'm going to defer to that person, hold the door, and to me, that's deference. It's part of the balance of being a member of a civil society, is understanding when to be liked, when to be nice amongst your friends and family, when to be respected and fair. So people look up to you. Hey, here's a leader I respect who I want to follow. Not, hey, here's my boss who's my buddy. And surely if I want a day off, my buddy is going to give me one, even if the other guy at the other desk isn't a buddy. And so I'm going to expect my boss to take care of me because he likes me. We're nice to each other. So I find that nice is a trap, and that it gets people in trouble. And if they focus on where the right parts of a civil society are and where they are in that civil society, then it makes it easier. So if you're in a friendly family cohort, being nice and being liked. If you're in a professional workplace, being respected, being fair, being kind and considerate to people. But people kind of mix that up. And if you're not careful, then being nice just is a catch-all for everybody out there to have their own interpretation of what that means. And I guarantee you, if you go into a workplace with 40 people and you ask them, what does it mean for your boss to be nice? You'll have a lot of different answers. You'd have probably fewer answers if you asked them, what does it mean for your boss to be fair and firm and respected?
Yeah. Thank you.
When you were talking about being nice and liking and things like that, I don't know if you saw Chip's episode, but when we did Chip's episode, it's interesting. We had a whole conversation though around this idea of liking each other at work. And so, because I think somewhere along the way, there's this belief that you can't like your boss or that you can't like your colleagues and stuff, that you have to keep all this stuff separate. But we spend so much time together that I think it's still important though that we that we do like our bosses, and that we not only do we respect them, but that we like them and that they like us. But to your point, there's that fine line that has to be drawn, right? Because
it's the devil's advocate that I like to play, because certainly I've had bosses I love, not just like, but love that boss. But it's combined with the more I like the boss or the coworker, the more I respected the person too. So I would never take advantage of that person because of that familiar relationship. And I believe that I had the maturity. I'm not sure everybody in the office has the same level of maturity. So I think it's important, because it would be great and ideal if everybody liked everybody else in an office and could get along really well and had fun together, could go out afterwards and have a dinner with, maybe bring your spouses even. And there's so much more satisfaction in an atmosphere where people do like each other. And so my only thing is a warning and a caution, I guess, on understanding that not everybody in that office will be at the same maturity level or be motivated the same way. So just be cautious about being nice. I think being kind is a different word, because I certainly try to make it a point to be kind to everybody I worked with and considerate. So I love those words, kind and considerate. Being nice to me just has this other connotation of being walked all over by people who are looking to do that. So you have to be mindful of the fact that there's going to be somebody. And in the military, we have this saying, I say in the Coast Guard, a leader spends 90% of their time on 5% of the people. And so you don't want to increase that number by mismanaging expectations that you're going to be a pushover and that they can get away with anything they want to get away with. And I guess I've just been stung by that 5% that takes up so much time and is so bad for morale in the rest of the office.
Well, I was just going to add, there's different men's groups I've been part of, and, the guidance they give is actually the world's not looking for you to be a nice guy. And they actually say that, a lot of times, people that are in this space of being nice, they're being inauthentic. They're not really representing their own needs. They're not really representing their own points of view. So instead of, being nice, it's like, be authentic, be direct, make your intentions clear. I find it interesting how it dovetails with being a good leader, because, of course, in men's groups, they're saying to all men, you want to be a good leader in your own life as well as, at work or in your community.
You know what word I've heard a lot in military circles? Compassion as a trait of a leader. So all these words are great words. And I think this is a good kind of a conversation. You've got kind, you've got nice, you've got compassionate. So what does each of those words mean? And more importantly, how does the leader who wants to be a leader who motivates, models the way, inspires, what kind of traits do they want to have? Is it being compassionate, which means I think that gets much more to the emotional intelligence arena, the compassion, than the nice and the like. It's a deeper meaning word to me. So I kind of like that word, compassion, because I think it gets into EI, which can cover emotional intelligence, which can cover a wide range of character traits.
The key to that is what you talked about earlier about going within. And I think the more that we go within and we know ourselves and we know our value set, then I think like means something different, because it means you're living true to who you are. And kind of to Dominic's point, you're not basing everything on the external. And from what I'm hearing you say, like, it sounds like you really did that a lot throughout your career. You really checked in with yourself, which part of exhausted am I? Which values are important right now? And I just keep kind of hearing that as a thread throughout, that you really checked within a lot.
I did that because, especially coming up in the military, you don't often have a choice to control what's around you. You take orders, and the orders are usually not like some people would think, just ridiculous orders that mean nothing. They actually have a purpose, but you don't get as much say, maybe, in the military as you might have in a more collaborative atmosphere. So sometimes it's just a matter of, hey, here's the plan that's been pushed down from above, and we're going to execute this mission in the Coast Guard. Post 9/11, here's the mission, here's the plan, here's what your ship is going to do. You're not going to, say, well, hey, I want to do this instead. So I think that you get used to saying, hey, what can I control? And there's a lot of power in that. And I think that if people are too soon in life able to think they can control everything around them, then they're disappointed a lot, because in reality, you really can't. So taking comfort in knowing what you can control and seeing that as power, I think is a really big step for anybody who wants to be a good leader, because that's all about leading yourself, leading others, leading the organization, leading change. That's the continuum of leadership that the Coast Guard follows. It starts with learning how to lead yourself.
That's great that you would mention that, because those are conversations that Dominic and Lynette and I have all the time about this idea of, and somebody had asked me one time about why I'm so passionate about doing like the whole leadership development and things. And I was like, what I have found in my career is that those who are not capable of leading themselves are not capable of leading others. So you've got to learn how to lead yourself first before you're ever going to step into that arena of leading others. And most people want to, immediately lead others because it feels like, oh, that's going to be rewarding, or I'm going to be able to get more things done and things like that. But their own personal lives are so out of control, or even their emotions are out of control or whatever, that I think that it just sets them up for failure. So, it's kind of funny. Like, what I love is that some of the things that you're talking about here today, one, surprised me that how you're talking about these in a good way. I mean, I'm surprised in a very good way, because it actually mirrors so many of the things that we actually want to deliver during our Leading Ladies of Gettysburg seminar, like the listening, the understanding, the compassion, the exhaustion. Lynette does this wonderful exercise on your depleting energies. Where are you being depleted from? And I think you have like 11 different categories, if I'm not mistaken, Lynette, where people can, rate, like, where are you be depleted, but where are you also getting your energy from? And then how do you improve that as well?
See that list, Lynette? I'll have to go online and take a look at your LinkedIn, and hopefully you've got it posted there.
I don't, but I can definitely send you more information on it.
So Angie, I'm thinking about this whole thing about being nice now, because I know you had that conversation. I heard your talk with Chip Fulgham, and I worked sort of for you when you were the Chief Human Capital Officer at DHS. I was an admiral in the Coast Guard. I think I was Deputy Commandant for Mission Support still while you were in that role, and everybody respected you. And it wasn't because you were the CHICO, the Chief Human Capital Officer, because I'm thinking about now my 3 Ps of power that I was taught by a boss when I was just a young starting officer, a new ensign is what they call us when you're brand new. And this boss told me one day I was having a hard time getting a junior person to do a job. And I said to my boss, hey, can you please help me? I'm just having a hard time getting this guy to do what I need him to do. And he looks at me and says, Sandy, there's 3 kinds of power. If you're going to succeed in the Coast Guard, you've got to use them right. And there's personal power, professional power, and position power. And he said, if you're going to succeed, you've got to lean on the first 2 and go to the last, which is position power, only as a last resort. So the personal power, this is your emotional intelligence quotient, your consideration of others, your compassion for others, your kindness maybe. And then your professional power is how you present yourself, what you know, your knowledge, your ability. And then your position power is that title, the Chief Human Capital Officer. And sure, there's probably, no doubt that the fact that Angie Bailey was the CHICO carried some weight, but I respected you because of your personal and professional powers, all the Chico stuff aside. So I do think that's really important if you're going to be successful as a leader, to understand how to leverage that personal power, whatever that means to us. We've had this conversation now, and you had it with Chip, and then your professional power. How do you leverage both those powers so that you're a leader who people follow because they want to, not because they have to?
Right, exactly. And I think, and that was kind of like the point that we were having with Chip, is like, in some ways it felt like the dream team, right? It headquarters, at DHS headquarters at that time, because it wasn't just that we liked each other. It's that because we liked each other, I think we were far more powerful as a team. And I will say, like, to your point, like from you and, Andrea Bright and all the different, Paige and, all the different Chicos that were out there, or that at least had that responsibility. Again, we actually liked each other. And because of that, to your point, there's a level of respect that comes when you like somebody, right? And I've heard the saying before, like when people say, look, you don't have to like me just as long as you respect me. And I'm like, I'm not sure I can respect somebody I don't really actually like.
Right.
I'll have to love you, but I have to like you. I have to like who you are. And in fact, even in relationships, personal relationships, everybody gets all hung up on love and stuff. But I think it's so important in a personal relationship that you like the person, just like that you genuinely like things about them, because I think that will carry you far further and a whole lot longer in that relationship than the whole love thing. And so to your point, I started out I had 40 years as well. And isn't it fascinating? Like, I grew up in the suck it up buttercup, right? You just charged ahead, you got everything done. But now in today's environment, it's kind of like, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do for you? And so sometimes, even though I can absolutely play that role, I have to admit, sometimes I'm like, can we just go back to suck it up buttercup? Because we got a whole lot more done then, kind of thing. So it's interesting, like us who are on this cusp of, we've seen the evolution of where things have gone. And I like this environment better, I will say. But boy, oh boy, there were just some days I just wanted us to get things done.
Right. Exactly. And then there's such good morale in that when a team has pulled together and has achieved the goal. And if there's too much of the drama, you never get that power that comes out of the team. If everybody's too concerned about, what is going on with the next person and doesn't, make the decision, then you're in a bad place too. And you're going to have bad morale. Even if you're nice, even if you're all nice and all like each other, if you can't come together and get over the hump and get the job done, you're not going to have that satisfaction, the deeper satisfaction that comes with succeeding and achieving your objective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lynette, Dominic, do you have any follow-up questions?
I don't have any follow-up.
I just want to thank you for the conversation. Yeah, I think it's been fascinating and very beneficial. So thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Great questions. And I'm glad it kind of follows on to what Chip said last time. And I know it's going to be a couple episodes in between his and mine, but I think these are very important conversations because words matter, and we don't think about what words we're using to describe ourselves and what the outcome of those behaviors might be. And yet then we have these divisions in our workplaces and our families and our society because we're not understanding ourselves and we're not understanding the other person. And we're getting stuck on words like nice and kind and considerate, right? So I think having these conversations, even if this podcast does no more, and it will surely do more, then just make people stop and think about who they are and what kind of person they are and which of those words matter to them and how do they interpret them and how are they going to apply those words in the workplace to make the workplace better and make the workplace environment and culture positive for everybody there.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Sandy, I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and wisdom that you've learned over the years regarding leadership. I look forward to diving deeper into the stories behind the stories each month. For more information and to learn more about us, please go to www.anandalife.org.